Moriden Athluan.
The story of his near single-handed assault on Windhelm and his execution of the traitor Ulrich Stormcloak of Windhelm are staples of the Imperial Legion. His devotion to duty, his zeal in combat, his dedication to the safety of the Empire and its citizens are told to all new recruits of the Legion.
Though his actions in the Civil War were what drew the eyes of all Tamriel to him, it is not what he is best known for. No, for it was after his days in the Legion that he began to show his true dedication to both the gods and the people of the Empire.
Come now and hear the tale of the Moriden Athluan's glorious mercenary days, and the great good that he did for all the people of Skyrim.
The bards can
worked
always
the
be
gods'
trusted
names.
to take a story and turn it to their own ends. There are elements of truth to their story. The truth, though, the truth is not what the bards would have you believe. Frostfall, 4th Era, 201. I did not impose on the Greybeard's hospitality, and left High Hrothgar shortly after I woke. Though I've already made up my mind about Mara, I thought it only right to let the priestess know that the situation in Ivarstead had been resolved. I arrived in Riften late in the afternoon and reported my success. My work, however, is not done, it seems. Mara has taken an interest in me, the priestess says, and wants to see how much I can help. I don't really wish to at this point, but as Mara is the only divine I've seen who seems to have any influence in the world, I don't want to tempt her to use her power against me if I refuse her either. So, it's off to Markarth, my second least favorite city in Skyrim. At least it's in the right general direction. I have things to drop off in Solitude at the museum. How is it that now that I feel I'm taking control over my own life, others seem to keep trying to take that from me? 13 Frostfall, 4th Era, 201. Because I need to head towards Markarth instead of Solitude, I decided to take a new path. Girol Pass, through what's left of Helgen, and then finally down into Falkreath. The pass was clear, though I imagine it's going to be far worse once the snows start in another month or so. Helgen was still in ruins, no surprise there, except perhaps that there are no new bandits in it. 'Twas a long day, but as the sun began its final descent, I was on the doorstep of the Dead Man's Drink. Anywhere else, and that might be considered a bad name for an inn, but here in Falkreath, it is just another reference to the giant graveyard that the Hole is known for. I'm not here for sightseeing, so simply took the room and prepared for the coming day's walk to Markarth. Oh, how I am so looking forward to being back. 14 Frostfall, 4th Era, 201. The day went much as the first, apart from having to also cope with a badly executed attempt by the Brotherhood to kill me. If this is the best they can send, then no wonder they are all but eliminated. I saw the assassin coming a long ways off, hiding behind the effects of either a spell or potion. It's called invisibility, but really it just makes it hard to see. Unless they are moving at breakneck speeds so that the effect can be more easily seen. My greatest fear with my return to Markarth is the aftermath of the Silverblood incident. More specifically, the god itself, and how they would react to me. Given that they had set me up to take the fall for Thonar and Madanak both, I suppose it might be reasonable to assume I might have taken some small offense to it. In my mind, though, they were just the hands and eyes of the real problem, and Thonar is dealt with. Though his brother did try to send a few toughs to kill me. Didn't even bother with the Brotherhood, though they fared about as well. As long as that is the extent of the problem, I'm not going to raise more trouble than I need to. Approaching the gates, I waited for trouble, but apart from eyeing me warily, they said nothing, and allowed me to pass into the city unmolested. Now to see what's going on with Calcelmo. With Fastrid, I at least had some idea. Here, I'm walking into it blind. This could be awkward. I got some strange looks when I asked about the location of the court wizard. I finally had enough of them and asked about it. Calcelmo is a man with an obsession, something I understand. His obsession, however, is the Dwemer ruin that Markarth is built into and on, Nishoan Zel. He works almost exclusively from a workstation on the far side of a bridge leading into the place. The question was a harmless one, as was the answer, as all it did was mark me as an outsider to the city, as if my appearance wasn't enough to make that clear. Obsession, I get. The thing is, obsession usually doesn't leave room for anything else in a person's life, especially things like love. So what in Mara's name am I doing here? It took everything I had, but I managed not to chuckle as Calcelmo laid out his problems. The man is not exactly young. That grey in his beard speaks to a fair bit more life experience than most have, but his issue is every bit the same one, that many a young man has been struck by fancy for a woman. The object of affection is, in this case, Faline. From his description, she's a volatile woman who can turn on you in a moment if she takes offense to your words. That may go a fair way to explaining why he is intimidated by her. He's so afraid of saying the wrong thing and messing everything up that he doesn't even dare to approach her at all. Paralyzed by fear, as the saying goes. He does have a plan, though, using me as an intermediary, as Mara's emissary, I guess I should say. Ingvar is a local man who is close friends with Faline, and the two have no romantic interest in each other, according to Calcelmo. All I have to do is talk to him, learn a little about her interests so that Calcelmo can prepare a little better, and then stand back and watch the magic happen. Or not. Helping love along doesn't always mean it works out, after all. I found him standing in the canal. I'm not entirely sure why, and I did not want to ask. Ingvar the singer is, as his name implies, something of a bard, or at the least, he trained for some time at the Bard's College in Solitude. If I had to guess, so he could use their skills to get with more women, which his reputation seems to confirm. That said, he was surprised when I asked about Faline, guarded, even. Calcelmo's thought that they were close friends seems justified, as he was defensive until I said I was looking into the matter for the mage. His face softened noticeably at that point and seemed approving. Faline, as it turns out, has a bit of a soft spot for poetry. This will be a bit of a problem for the mage, obviously. As much as he knows about the Dwemer, I doubt he knows much of anything about poems. Ingvar's solution is to repurpose a poem he wrote for a woman in Riverwood some time ago for Faline. This seems ripe for disaster when she finds out Calcelmo didn't write it, but maybe that's not how we frame this. A smart man doesn't hide things, so instead we don't claim that he wrote it, only that it made him think of her, so had me deliver it, far less likely to go completely sideways, and easier for Calcelmo to play off of. I read the poem, and it's not bad. Certainly seems to fit the situation and state his intent fairly clearly. We'll have to see how this flies. I'd invoke Mora's blessing on this, but I'm not sure I have the authority. Calcelmo had neglected to mention that Faline was the Jarl's housecarl. That made approaching her privately a bit of a challenge, since I doubt that either party would want this bandied about before they had decided themselves what was going on. Rumor would not be their friend here, certainly. Indeed, when I caught up to her as she sat at dinner, she was surprised that I brought up Calcelmo at all. She didn't think badly of him, certainly, but she was more of the opinion that he was more interested in dead Dwemer than anybody living, let alone her. At first, she thought I was just embarrassing myself, and from my end it felt that way, but I insisted, and at length got her to read the poem. Ingvar was right. Words do move her. I've been sent back to the old mage with a reply that indicates she is at least open to the idea. I'll have to make sure Calcelmo knows about the poem, or this is going to come apart around him faster than Stormcloak's rebellion did, and possibly in an even uglier fashion. I don't know if it is infatuation or if this will grow into something more, but the reply put a spring in Calcelmo's steps. After reading the note, he all but bolted from the room to see her. Not sure how that will all fall out, but it's no longer my problem. I did what I could, gave the advice I could, and now it's up to them. Me? I've been on my feet for 2 days just to get here and deal with this. I'm going to the overpriced inn and getting some sleep. 15 Frostfall, 4th Era, 201. The Forsworn have repopulated their fortress at Broken Tower, and the bandits have had success recruiting over at Robber's Gorge, but otherwise there was little of interest to speak of on my walk back to Solitude. I'm looking forward to a day not spent on the road, and so am hoping that my new employer, if that is what he turns out to be, will be willing to grant me that much. Of course, I know little about how Aryan plans to use me in my role as Relic Hunter. Does he find them and send me to get them? Do I just bring in all the junk I find and we sort through it? So many questions. For tomorrow. My feet are sore, my back aches, and I'm hardly fit company after being rained on for the better half of the afternoon. I paid the exorbitant sum required and went up to bed. Suddenly, I wonder if the pay at the museum will be enough to cover this expense, or if some other deal could be worked out. I doubt I can afford to pay over 7,000 septums a month to stay here. 16 Frostfall, 4th Era, 201. I woke and strolled over to the museum, where I handed the requested items over to Aryan. He took them gladly, but there was a look in his eyes that told me that perhaps something was awry. He considered, it seemed, for a few moments, and then told me straight out that I had been less than honest the last time we'd met. Small things, like not mentioning that I was Dragonborn, or Thane of Whiterun, or the single largest donator of items to the museum over the last several weeks. The first two I could only shrug at. The last, however, surprised me, as I hadn't known I'd been doing any donations at all. I told him as much, saying that the closest I could think of to me doing anything like that was placing a large amount of what I thought to be useless clutter in some empty boxes near inns, ones that... And that's when it dawned on me that the boxes had a dragon head logo on them. The same one I saw on the banners around the museum. I'd been donating to a place I'd been hoping to work for weeks, and never known it. That was embarrassing. But in the end, not an issue. When I asked how he'd found the other two out, it turned out all he had done was ask a few people about me, since he had my name. The Imperials had told him most of it, the Legions, in fact. The rest, rumor and careful sifting of information had given him. Fortunately, he had a better idea than me simply working for him. He took down the felt rope across the entrance and started introducing me to the museum, as he explained. He had always wanted the museum to be a general repository for all things unique about Skyrim history, its peoples, and its cultures. Artifacts had always been a part of that plan. Things like the 3 items I brought back, which are unique in the world and have stories associated with them or were created by noted artists or craftsmen. As a relic hunter, I would have been sent after them. As the Dragonborn, however, he had a proposal. The items displayed here would remain mine, on loan to the museum. I would get a share of the donations made to the museum by its visitors. I get a place to store the most powerful items and relics that I locate in the world, or at least Skyrim, and also have the ability to take anything I need at will, knowing that everything else will be guarded and watched. All I have to do is allow it. I won't be working for Aryan, I'd be working with him, and given how large the halls he showed me are, his ambitions are nothing if not large. I'm not sure how much I'd ever be able to find of the items I saw listed as I walked the halls, but it certainly gives me an idea of how much is lying around in the world somewhere to be found. And it would all be mine, to do with as I please. Power of all types and varieties at my beck and call, and money to help fund it all. I couldn't help but say yes. This deal sounds so one-sided in my favor, how could I say otherwise? Then he told me that all the donations needed to be sorted out first before they could open properly. And when I thought on how much I had been donating, the thought of having to run through all of those items made my knees weak. I'd wanted a day free of travel. I may have a few to get everything dealt with here. I was examining the display relating to the Civil War and its outcome, in which I did have a small part, one might recall, when I looked out across the entirety of the Dragonborn Hall and noticed something odd. On the main stairway, just on one side, where it is largely out of sight, was what looked like a switch. I went down to have a look, and discovered that this was exactly what it was. Looking around the room, though, I could not figure out what the switch was for. Before my good sense overcame my curiosity, I pushed it. A loud grinding noise filled the room, and the center dais dropped several inches before retracting under the flagstones where I stood, and a staircase that had clearly not been used in quite some time was revealed. I left my good sense behind again, and descended. A short, circular stairway, a long, torch-lit hallway, and a short stretch of raw rock later, I emerged in a room that, for all of me, looked like a banquet hall. 2 raised areas on either side of a slightly lower portion, several tables and chairs, and silver plates, cups, and ewers strewn about the floor. The bed on one end was a little out of place, but otherwise it could have been a Jarl's feasting hall. No other entrances presented themselves, no other switches or pull chains or any other method of opening a potential secret hallway were in evidence, which leaves me with a mystery. What was this room? Why is it here? Why is the only entrance from the Dragonborn hall of the museum? Only one person was likely to have answers. It turned out to be innocent enough. The Dragonborn Hall was an addition to the original building, and when they broke ground on it, they'd found the room I had discovered, an ancient part of the Blue Palace from the era of Emperor Pelagius III. The room had been a panic room for when the Mad King was in one of his more manic episodes. The room itself had been sealed away long before even the rest of the Pelagius wing was, and all but forgotten about until Aryan stumbled across it. He'd all but forgotten himself, but the original plan had been to use it as a bolt hole for the more valuable artifacts in the event that Solitude ever came under attack. Now that he's been reminded, he's going to use it as a new display area, the Chamber of Secrets, and use it for more, how did he put it, questionable artifacts. I'd have thought that would include some of the Daedric pieces, but since I've seen those displays already, I'm not entirely sure what he means by that. Time will tell, I suppose. After hours of sorting, mounting, and exploring, the hour was getting advanced. I was heading over to the Skiva for yet another overpriced night of sleep before starting toward the ruins where Jürgen Windcaller's tomb is, when I was stopped almost on exit by a priest of RK. At first I had the feeling that somebody had died today, but he quickly assured me that wasn't the case. No, whoever had died had done so long since. Seeing my confusion, I was filled in. Let it be known that with our partnership less than a day old, I am very upset with Aryan for not mentioning a small thing like a haunting of the museum, nor that he had sent for a priest to deal with it. One who would like me, as someone who is at least associated with the museum, to accompany him later tonight to deal with the problem. On the downside, I am tired and hungry. I can deal with both of those before anything happens tonight. On the upside, well, I've been looking for evidence that the gods were taking an active hand in the affairs of Nirn. This should give me a chance to see a priest do their work without my direct interference. I'll just be there to observe. I want it understood that when this began, I expected trickery, elaborate wording, and other forms of deception. Though I have seen ghosts before, I have never seen one in a place where man and Mer were actively living, only tombs and other similar places. I expected the haunting to be some kind of paranoia on the part of Aryan that the priest would be taking advantage of. It therefore surprised me when he made a sensible suggestion when we began, and had us separate to look for anything out of place. I went to the library, and it did not take long to establish that either there was a very good mage somewhere nearby, or this was no hoax. I have never seen a paper tornado before. That alone would be impressive to see a mage pull off. Having various other tomes flying around the room at the same time, however, made it even more so. In the back, tucked away between some old books, I found an equally old note. The context made it clear that it was a man to his wife, but I didn't recognize the name signed at the bottom. When I showed it to the priest, however, he did. The letter was from the original builder of this hall, Niles McNarian, to his wife. This makes it at least likely, according to the priest, that this is who is haunting the building. The priest also claims that the spirit is becoming agitated, saying that he'd had dishes thrown at him in the reception hall, and weapons fall off of displays behind him. He also claimed that the time he has spent trying to attune himself to an unknown spectre had taken its toll, That being the case, he wanted to take a brief rest to regain some of that energy. Oddly enough, when we passed through the reception hall, there were no plates or anything else on the floor. Which means either he's lying to me to make it seem more dangerous than it is, or he took the time to clean up the dishes after they were hurled at him by an angry ghost. I know which I believe. Despite my intention, I must have dozed while waiting for the priest. When I shook myself awake, the priest was already awake and calling to me. I followed, expecting him to have found some kind of unexplainable thing in the museum to justify the whole ghost story. What we found... I don't think that magic could account for this, nor do I think the priest had enough time to set up an illusion on this scale. The entire reception hall had been turned upside down. Literally. I am left with the uncomfortable notion that this might not be some kind of trick on somebody's part. And it is not a comforting thought. Again, we split up, with me heading into the basement, and then to the Natural History Hall. If this is a ghost, then I shudder to think what the History Hall will be like. I spent a lot of time in there earlier today setting up realistic-looking animals. The only thing I found in the basement was a portal-looking piece of stone with a lock somehow built into it. Given that portals to Oblivion are, as we found out in the Oblivion Crisis, quite real, I decided against touching the thing. For the rest of the room, the only unusual thing was a large number of empty wine bottles that had been stacked in a giant triangle shape, similar to what you might see in a village game. I tried to resist the urge to use the unrelenting force shout on it. I failed. My hour setting up the natural history displays came back to haunt... I need a better phrase here. Let's just say it was a very bad idea. The ghost had animated literally every single thing in the room. What this means, in simple terms, is that when I entered, there was a mud crab, 2 trolls, a giant, a mammoth, a bear, a spriggan, a pair of frostbite spiders, a hagraven, 2 wolves, a cow, a horse, and a chicken, all very suddenly interested in either killing each other or, more dominantly, killing me. A giant would have been a problem on its own. With everything else, it was a nightmare. I squeezed myself into a tight corner and tried to wait it all out, to see if they'd kill each other off, and for the most part, they did. Surprisingly, the chicken outlasted every other creature in there. Eventually, though, there were only a few of the beasts left, and I had no choice but to finish the fight. Oh, and the entire room was flooded as well, so all this happened while wading ankle-deep in cold glacial water. After the carnage had subsided and I was able to look around unharassed, I tried looking for anything that was... well, everything was out of place at this point. I'm not even sure how to tell this part, really. I found an old journal. We'll just keep this simple. The journal, like the note earlier, was Macnarian's, and it mentioned a portrait that he had commissioned. After conferring with the priest, I will be searching the grounds for this portrait, and then hanging it somewhere prominent, as it is our guess that the spirit is Macnarian, and that he might be feeling a tad bit forgotten. As it turns out, I think I know where to look. There's only 2 places in this museum that have paintings. One of them is filled with paintings, but I put them all there earlier today. The other is the basement I'd already searched. The one with bottles all over the floor. The bottles were still on the floor, more or less where I'd shouted them, so those didn't appear to be possessed. The painting I sought, or pretty certain I sought anyhow, was tucked behind a shipping crate. I pulled it out carefully and then took it back to the priest, who was doing his usual thing when I found him. Nothing at all. How is it that every single major update on this matter has been because of me, not through the priest? If I didn't know this was a real haunting, I would have many questions for the man. I ran the painting back down to the reception hall, where it was mounted over the fireplace. The priest declared the mission completed, but suggested we get some sleep, just to make sure. He was already certain, but just in case. I was tired, both physically and of this game. I said nothing as I pushed past him, went back to the bed, and went straight to sleep.